The conflict between Israel and Palestine is one of the most enduring and intractable in the world. For over 7 decades, the two sides have been locked in a bitter struggle over land, resources, and recognition. This conflict has claimed countless lives, displaced millions, and fueled cycles of violence and mistrust that have proven nearly impossible to break. At the heart of the conflict lies the question of Palestinian self-determination. After the Holocaust, the international community supported the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine, a land already inhabited by Palestinians. This decision led to the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in 1948, an event they call the Nakba, or catastrophe. Since then, Israel has expanded its control over the West Bank and Gaza Strip, territories internationally recognized as belonging to a future Palestinian state. This occupation has been punctuated by periods of intense violence, including the 1967 Six-Day War, the First and Second Intifadas, and multiple wars in Gaza. The failure to find a lasting solution to this conflict has had devastating consequences for both Palestinians and Israelis. It has also destabilized the region and hampered efforts to achieve peace and security in the Middle East. The year 2024 has been marked by a dramatic escalation in violence, pushing the conflict into a dangerous new phase. Understanding the current situation requires acknowledging the deep historical roots of the conflict and the failures of the international community to find a just and lasting resolution. The year 2024 has been a horrific chapter in the long history of the Israel-Palestine conflict. The year began with simmering tensions, fueled by continued Israeli settlement expansion in the West Bank and the ongoing blockade of Gaza. However, the situation exploded in violence on October 7, 2023, when Hamas, the militant group that controls Gaza, launched a surprise attack into Israel, killing over 1,200 Israelis. Israel responded with overwhelming force, launching a massive air and ground offensive against Gaza. The Israeli military, citing the need to destroy Hamas infrastructure and weaponry, has carried out relentless airstrikes and artillery bombardments, resulting in widespread devastation and a staggering loss of civilian life. As of December 8, 2024, over 44,708 Palestinians have been killed in the conflict, including thousands of women and children. The United Nations estimates that over 1.9 million Palestinians have been displaced from their homes, seeking refuge in overcrowded UN shelters or fleeing to neighboring countries. The 2024 conflict has been characterized by its brutality and the sheer scale of human suffering. Hospitals, schools, and residential areas have been targeted, prompting accusations of war crimes and indiscriminate attacks on civilians by both sides. The conflict has also seen a disturbing rise in anti-Palestinian rhetoric and violence within Israel and a surge in anti-Semitism globally. The events of 2024 have brought the Israel-Palestine conflict back to the forefront of international attention, raising urgent questions about accountability, the possibility of a negotiated settlement, and the future of the region. The ongoing conflict in Gaza has created a humanitarian crisis of catastrophic proportions. The relentless bombardment has left Gaza's already fragile infrastructure in ruins. Hospitals are overwhelmed with casualties, lacking essential medical supplies, electricity, and clean water. The blockade imposed by Israel on Gaza since 2007 has severely restricted the flow of goods, fuel, and humanitarian aid into the territory. This blockade, coupled with the destruction of essential infrastructure, has pushed Gaza's 2.3 million residents to the brink of survival. Severe shortages of food, water, and medicine are widespread, leading to a surge in malnutrition, waterborne diseases, and preventable deaths. The UN has warned of a looming public health catastrophe if the blockade is not lifted and aid is not allowed to reach those in need. The situation is particularly dire for the nearly 1.9 million Palestinians who have been displaced from their homes. Many are living in overcrowded UN shelters, where conditions are squalid and access to basic necessities is limited. The international community has pledged millions in aid to alleviate the suffering in Gaza. However, the delivery of aid has been hampered by the ongoing fighting, the blockade, and bureaucratic obstacles. The scale of the humanitarian crisis demands an immediate ceasefire, an end to the blockade, and a concerted international effort to provide urgent humanitarian assistance to the besieged population of Gaza. The 2024 conflict has been particularly dangerous for journalists covering the fighting. Both sides have been accused of targeting journalists and media organizations, attempting to control the narrative and limit independent reporting on the ground. The Committee to Protect Journalists, CPJ, has documented at least 137 journalists killed in the conflict. As of December 6, 2024, of those, 129 were Palestinian, highlighting the disproportionate dangers faced by Palestinian journalists reporting from within Gaza. Journalists have been killed in airstrikes, targeted by snipers, and detained by both Israeli forces and Hamas. Media offices have been bombed, and journalists have been subjected to threats, intimidation, and harassment. The targeting of journalists is a blatant attack on freedom of the press and the public's right to know. It is crucial that both sides respect the rights of journalists to report freely and safely, providing independent and impartial coverage of the conflict. The international community must hold those responsible for attacks on journalists accountable and work to ensure a safe environment for journalists to carry out their vital work. Section 5. The world reacts. Condemnation and inaction. The international community has responded to the 2024 Israel-Palestine conflict with a mixture of condemnation and calls for a ceasefire. But, concrete action has been limited. The UN Security Council, hampered by divisions among its permanent members, has been unable to inaction. The international community has responded to the 2024 Israel-Palestine conflict with a mixture of condemnation and calls for a ceasefire. But, concrete action has been limited. The UN Security Council, hampered by divisions among its permanent members, has been unable to pass a resolution demanding an end to the violence. The United States, a staunch ally of Israel, has blocked several UN resolutions critical of Israel's actions in Gaza. This has fueled accusations of double standards and a failure to hold Israel accountable for its actions. The International Criminal Court, or ICC, has opened an investigation into possible war crimes committed by both sides during the conflict. This has been welcomed by human rights groups but condemned by Israel, which does not recognize the ICC's jurisdiction. Amnesty International has accused Israel of committing crimes against humanity and apartheid against Palestinians, calling for an end to arms sales to Israel and targeted sanctions against Israeli officials. These accusations have been met with fierce denials from Israel. The lack of a unified and robust international response has been a source of frustration for many. Some argue that the international community's inaction has emboldened both sides, prolonging the conflict and contributing to the immense suffering of civilians. Section 6. A war of narratives, justification and denial. The 2024 Israel-Palestine conflict has been accompanied by a fierce battle over the narrative, with both sides accusing the other of war crimes, terrorism, and using civilians as human shields. Israel claims that its actions in Gaza are acts of self-defense, necessary to eliminate Hamas and prevent future attacks. Israel argues that Hamas uses civilians as human shields, deliberately operating from within densely populated areas. Israel also accuses Hamas of using humanitarian aid to smuggle weapons and build tunnels. Hamas, on the other hand, portrays its attacks as resistance against Israeli occupation and aggression. Hamas argues that Israel's blockade of Gaza is a form of collective punishment and that its military operations constitute war crimes and state terrorism. Both sides have presented evidence to support their claims, but the fog of war and the prevalence of misinformation and propaganda make it difficult to verify information and determine the veracity of competing narratives. This war of narratives plays out in the media, in international forums, and on social media, further polarizing public opinion and complicating efforts to find a peaceful resolution. Section 7. The Siege of Kamal Adwan Hospital, a case study. The siege of Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza on December 8, 2024, exemplifies the brutal reality of the conflict and the dangers faced by civilians and medical workers. The hospital, one of the few remaining medical facilities in northern Gaza, was sheltering hundreds of patients, including women and children, seeking refuge from the fighting. According to eyewitnesses and medical staff, Israeli forces surrounded the hospital, positioning snipers on nearby rooftops and preventing anyone from entering or leaving the facility. The hospital's generators, the only source of electricity for life-saving medical equipment, repeatedly came under fire, disrupting surgeries and jeopardizing the lives of patients. Medical staff reported that Israeli forces fired on ambulances attempting to evacuate patients and targeted medical workers moving within the hospital compound. The siege of Kamal Adwan Hospital is a clear violation of international humanitarian law, which grants special protection to hospitals and medical personnel during armed conflict. The targeting of medical facilities and the obstruction of medical care constitute war crimes. The international community must condemn these actions and hold those responsible accountable. Section 8. Justice delayed, justice denied. As the death toll mounts and the humanitarian crisis deepens, the question of accountability and justice remains paramount. Human rights organizations, legal experts, and many within the international community are calling for independent investigations into alleged war crimes committed by both sides. The International Criminal Court, or ICC, has launched an investigation into possible war crimes, but its efforts have been met with resistance from Israel. Israel argues that the ICC lacks jurisdiction in this case and has refused to cooperate with the court's investigation. Many Palestinians and human rights advocates are skeptical that justice will be served. They argue that the international community has a long history of failing to hold Israel accountable for its actions against Palestinians. The pursuit of justice and accountability is crucial, not only for the victims of this conflict, but also for deterring future atrocities and breaking the cycle of violence. The international community must support credible and impartial investigations and ensure that those responsible for war crimes, regardless of their nationality or affiliation, are held accountable for their actions. Section 9. The unending conflict, a look ahead. As of December 2024, the end of the current conflict seems nowhere in sight. Despite international calls for a ceasefire, both sides remain locked in a deadly stalemate, seemingly more interested in military victory than a negotiated settlement. The underlying issues that have fueled the conflict for decades, the occupation, the settlements, the blockade, the status of Jerusalem, and the right of return for Palestinian refugees, remain unresolved. Adding to the complexity, the Palestinian political landscape is deeply divided, further complicating efforts to find a negotiated solution. The human cost of this unending conflict is immeasurable. Generations of Palestinians and Israelis have known nothing but violence, displacement, and loss. The physical and psychological scars of this conflict will continue to shape the lives of those affected for generations to come. Finding a just and lasting solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict is one of the most pressing challenges facing the international community. It requires a fundamental shift in approach, moving away from short-term crisis management towards addressing the root causes of the conflict and investing in a future where both Palestinians and Israelis can live in peace, security, and dignity.